So, I do have to give credit where credit's due, and our MC technically had her most villainous moments in this episode out of the four. Does a lot of it stem from being rude? Sure. But I mean, hell, she did cut off someone's leg, so that's pretty villainous-y. And at face value, yeah, it is. Until you realize that her whole reasoning is, what a villainous-y thing. Saving random people on the side of the road, and I'm like... Less would be more for this character. Like, if she probably said a fraction of what truly goes on in her head, she actually would kind of seem like a psychopath. But every step of the way, like, at face value, the way she handled the heroine is actually villainess-y. It's not really villainess, she's rude more than anything, but at least it is setting the path for resentment, which props to her. But damn, man. It reminds me of that Simpson meme where you step on the rake and it just keeps smacking you in the face, just this girl doesn't realize she's doing it. I have full live reactions over on Patreon. If you want to see my full thought to any of these episodes, you know it's over there exclusively. So, I would say this is probably the best episode out of the four, hands down. And it's interesting because there was a moment in this episode that was a kind of blink and you miss it, and it seemingly only happened to one of the characters. But during the whole scene, where all the boys are surrounding, of course, the heroine, and we're discussing her paper about how to pretty much make everyone equal in this world, she pretty much throws it back in her face, and one of the character's eyes lights up, almost like a path was triggered. That's how I interpreted it, and it wasn't all the character's eyes, it was a single person, which is interesting. So I think that does confirm that this isn't just like a game turned into reality. It probably still functions like a video game if that's how we're going about this. But either way, very interesting moment, and it's interesting because a lot of stuff actually happens in this episode. So we set the little boy up for success. He's now going to school. Everyone knows he comes from the slums, so there's obviously going to be discrimination and pushback there. You have, of course, our girl working alongside the heroine, which, you know, I thought last week was a very interesting turn of events, because usually in these types of shows, who's supposed to be the villainess turns out to be the heroine because now she's, well, the MC, so a lot of things just flip. Instead with this show, we're keeping her as, like, more of a supporter, but at the same time, there's still a lot of potential for absolute pushback and them having kind of antagonist roles towards each other. Our girl is convinced she's going to get tossed out of this kingdom, and the glee on her face is just so questionable, because what happens afterwards? Does she think she'll just go be a villainess somewhere else? No, she'll probably just die in the wilderness, let's be honest. But the idea that, you know, you have an MC who's basically all about bringing about that positive change. And in a lot of ways, what our quote-unquote villainess Alicia's seemingly doing is kind of a lot of the similar thing. She's bringing in a poor kid from the slums to have a chance at a life that only rich nobility usually get. At face value, they have a lot in common, but there's a big difference between the two characters' viewpoints. For the heroine, it's basically, we tear down this wall that is quite a literal wall, but also figurative, about keeping two sides apart and basically show that equality can be given. Where for our villainess, she's basically saying tearing down that wall will just bring about chaos, and ultimately you can't have a world where everyone actually is equal, which is interesting because, you know, at face value you think it's going against what she believes in. But what actually, she makes a lot of sense. At the end of the day, her character is pretty much like, the boy behind me, just because he was born into a poor situation, doesn't mean he shouldn't be given the same opportunities as you or I, because at the end of the day, this kid's bound to be more talented than half the people attending this school just because they have a noble bloodline. At the same time, however, those who are more talented than other people should be treated better. So it's basically saying that everyone should probably have an equal chance at being successful, but if you're successful and more talented than other people, you should be treated better. Which, to be fair, actually does at face value sound like it's a villainous-y thing to say, but it probably is the most decent thing to say at the end of the day. So the whole idea about her character is that in this episode, she starts to she wants people to hate her, right? So when all of the supporters, because basically, we're set up in a situation where no one's going to go against the heroine because everyone's just going to blindly follow her. So you throw in our girl who actually might have the chance of redirecting certain things. And she basically is like, oh, a cult that's basically following, I'll just be rude to them. I don't care. She actually is. She's actually fairly rude. And it's funny because usually in a situation like this where the goody two-shoes comes in, okay, that was a little rude, but it's okay, let's just apologize. She's like, nah, I'm good, and walks away. Probably her most villainous moment, easily, of the show to date, is where she just actually refuses. They didn't go comedic with it, they just straight up refused and said, nah, I'm gonna do my own thing. And honestly, it was pretty great. But I did really like the scene where, so, over the past couple of episodes, we've actually gained a decent amount of support, but the biggest is this kid who's now attending school with us. But we now have, I guess, kind of an informant, a spy sort of a deal. So this girl, she ends up discovering, covered in burns and marks, and her one leg is just very badly damaged, to the point that it has to be cut off. And what she ends up doing is she carries her into the village, and she puts up a barrier, and she's like, ha ha ha, look at how evil I am. I save random people. And I'm thinking to myself, sometimes you just want to smack this girl for her lack of common sense, but that's kind of the brilliance about this. So she does this like magnificent spell, actually really cool, but it kind of looks like it probably feels like electricity going through her, and all of her wounds are healed, which is great. But then she has to cut off a leg because ultimately, I mean, that leg it's too far gone. And it's interesting, right? Now, they didn't, like, stylize it in a brutal way or anything, but, at face value, most of the people looking through that barrier just see a little girl with a sword coming down on someone who's seemingly helpless. But the idea that anyone who has too much damage in this village, they get left for dead. Like, that's what it is. So for them, they probably just thought, well, yeah, makes sense. I mean, she's too far gone, can't have an extra mouth to feed, but the fact that when the barrier comes down, she's actually alive is pretty interesting. Face value, what she says about it being a villainess moment is just so stupid, you have to laugh at it. But I appreciate how she builds like a little army of informants and allies and stuff, and Grandpa's just being like, what the hell? I like how at least one character's like, what is a villainess? Like, what are you saying, girl? And, he just kind of accepts it at face value because he's just a wholesome guy, but you gotta love it. Either way, though, I will give credit where it's due. This was her most villainous moment. Last week had a couple of those, but nothing truly crazy. This episode, she has that rude dialogue kind of on point, so it kind of paints her in the more villainous path. And I mean, if you take a step back and manipulate the situation, she did cut someone's leg off, and hell, that's pretty villainess-y. Just don't explain that it was to save a life, because truly a villainess would save someone's life. She has so many opportunities to be the biggest bitch in the show, and she just falls every single time. Let me know what you thought of this episode. I definitely thought it was the best out of the four, hands down, and I'm very excited to see where the future of the show is going to go, but let me know your feelings down below. Be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new around here, and of course, ring that bell. Like I mentioned, we have full live reactions over on Patreon, and hey, while you're over there, I'll also give you a video shout out. So today we got Adam Dundorf, David Story, Travis Rains, and we also have Athmil. So I appreciate the support, everyone. Please take care, and you'll have a good one.